The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of the bridal suite at the Grand Manor Hotel, casting delicate shadows across the pristine white wedding dress hanging from the mahogany armoire. Sarah Mitchell sat on the edge of the velvet bench, her hands trembling as she stared at her phone screen. The text message had arrived at 6:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. "I can't do this anymore. The wedding is off. Don't try to contact me. Michael." The words blurred together as tears gathered in her eyes. 3 years of planning, 200 invited guests, and a lifetime of dreams crumbling with 13 simple words. Sarah's maid of honor, Jessica, burst through the door carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the brightest smile that quickly faded when she saw Sarah's expression. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost," Jessica said, setting the coffee down on the antique side table. Sarah wordlessly handed her the phone. Jessica read the message twice, her face contorting with disbelief and anger. "Are you kidding me? 24 hours before your wedding? What kind of coward does this through a text message?" The hotel suite fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the busy street below. Sarah had dreamed of this weekend since she was a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's closet. The Grand Manor was the most prestigious venue in the city, booked 2 years in advance. The flowers alone had cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her parents had flown in from Seattle, Michael's family from Boston, and friends from college had taken vacation days to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "I need to call him," Sarah said, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. "No, you don't," Jessica replied firmly, placing her hand over Sarah's. "If he wanted to talk, he would have called instead of sending a text. Don't give him the satisfaction of hearing you beg." But Sarah wasn't listening. She pressed Michael's number and listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His familiar voice asking callers to leave a message felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She hung up without speaking and immediately called again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. He had turned off his phone. "He blocked me," Sarah whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. 3 years together, and he can't even talk to me for 5 minutes. Jessica sat beside her on the bench and wrapped her arms around Sarah's shoulders. "We need to start making calls. Your parents, the venue, the caterer. Everyone needs to know." The next few hours passed in a blur of painful phone calls and shocked reactions. Sarah's mother cried harder than Sarah herself, alternating between heartbreak for her daughter and fury at Michael. Her father's voice was tight with controlled anger as he promised to handle canceling the vendors. The hotel manager, a kind woman named Margaret, appeared at their door with tissues and offered to help coordinate the cancellations without additional charges. "In 30 years of working in this business, I've seen it all," Margaret said gently. "But I've never seen someone handle it with as much grace as you're showing right now." Grace was the last thing Sarah felt she possessed at that moment. She felt hollow, embarrassed, and completely lost. The life she had planned, the future she had envisioned, had disappeared overnight. Michael had been her college sweetheart, the man she had moved across the country for when he got his dream job at a tech startup. She had given up her own career prospects to support his ambitions, believing they were building something together. As the afternoon wore on, guests began arriving in the city for the weekend's festivities. Sarah's college roommate, Amanda, showed up at the hotel suite with red eyes and a fierce expression. "I just got your message. Where is he? I'm going to kill him." "Get in line," Jessica muttered, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Sarah appreciated their loyalty, but their anger only made the situation feel more real. She kept expecting Michael to call, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding or a case of cold feet that they could work through. But as the evening approached, that hope began to fade. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be happening at that very moment at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Michael had proposed. Instead, Sarah found herself ordering room service and fielding calls from confused family members who were just learning about the cancellation. Her cousin called from the airport, unsure whether to get on the plane or go back home. Her grandmother, 92 and sharp as a tack, delivered the most cutting assessment of all. "Good riddance," Grandma Rose said over the phone. "Any man who abandons ship before the storm even starts isn't worth the salt in his tears. You're better off finding out now than after you've wasted more years on him." But Sarah didn't feel better off. She felt humiliated and heartbroken. Tomorrow morning, she would have to face all the vendors, all the guests, all the people who had believed in their love story. The wedding cake was already decorated, the flowers arranged, the church decorated with white ribbons and candles. Everything was perfect except for the missing groom. That evening, Sarah's father knocked on the hotel room door. When she opened it, she saw a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit standing beside him. The stranger had kind eyes and an air of quiet authority that reminded her of her father. "Sarah, this is James Carter," her father said. "He owns this hotel and several others in the city. When he heard about what happened, he wanted to meet you personally." James stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know that we're doing everything we can to make this situation easier for your family. Margaret tells me you've been handling this with remarkable strength." "Thank you," Sarah managed, though she felt anything but strong. "Your staff has been wonderful. I also wanted you to know," James continued, "that if you need anything at all during this difficult time, please don't hesitate to ask. Sometimes life throws us curveballs that feel impossible to handle, but I found that how we respond to those moments often defines who we become." There was something about his tone that made Sarah look at him more carefully. He wasn't just being polite or professional. He seemed to genuinely care, which struck her as unusual for someone she had never met before. "That's very kind," she said. "I just wish I understood why this happened. We had problems like any couple, but I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid." James nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are. And sometimes that's a blessing in disguise, even when it doesn't feel like one." After he left, Sarah found herself thinking about his words. She had always prided herself on being a good judge of character, but clearly, she had been wrong about Michael. What else had she been wrong about? What signs had she missed? Late that night, unable to sleep, Sarah sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Jessica and Amanda had finally gone to their own rooms after hours of trying to distract her with movies and ice cream. The silence gave her space to think, really think, for the first time since receiving that devastating text message. She thought about the past few months leading up to the wedding. Michael had been distant, working late more often, seeming distracted during their conversations about honeymoon plans and their future together. She had attributed it to stress from his job and wedding planning. But now she wondered if there had been more to it. There had been small things too. The way he had seemed reluctant to finalize certain wedding details. How he had suggested postponing their engagement photos. The fact that he had never seemed genuinely excited about any aspect of the wedding planning. Always deferring to her preferences with a shrug and, "Whatever you want, babe." Sarah realized that she had been planning a wedding to marry someone who had already checked out of their relationship. The thought was both devastating and oddly liberating. If Michael had been having doubts for months, then their relationship hadn't been as strong as she had believed. Maybe she was better off discovering this now rather than after years of marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend from high school, who lived in another state and couldn't make it to the wedding. "Heard what happened? That guy was never good enough for you anyway. You dodged a bullet, girl." It was the first message that made Sarah smile, even if just a little. Maybe her friends and family could see something she had been blind to. Maybe this humiliation was actually a rescue. The next morning brought a steady stream of vendors arriving at the hotel to collect decorations, return linens, and settle final payments. Sarah's father handled most of it, but she insisted on being present for some of the conversations. She wanted to face this head-on rather than hiding in her room. The florist, a gentle older man named Roberto, arrived with his assistant to collect the bridal bouquet and centerpieces. When he saw Sarah, his eyes filled with compassion. "Miss Sarah, I am so sorry this happened to you. In 40 years of doing weddings, I have seen many things, but this..." He shook his head sadly. "You deserve so much better than this treatment." "Thank you, Roberto. The flowers were beautiful. I'm sorry they went to waste." "Nothing is waste when it brings a moment of beauty into the world," he said philosophically. "And you will have many more moments of beauty ahead." This man, he did not deserve to see you as a bride. His words stayed with her as she watched him carefully pack the arrangements back into his van. There was something profound about his certainty that better things awaited her. She wished she could feel that confident about her future. The wedding photographer, a young woman named Lisa, arrived to return the deposit. She had been scheduled to capture every moment of what was supposed to be the happiest day of Sarah's life. "I hope this doesn't sound inappropriate," Lisa said hesitantly, "but I've shot a lot of weddings, and I always watch the couples during their engagement sessions. Some couples just glow together, you know? Others seem like they're going through the motions." Sarah waited, sensing there was more. "You glowed, but he never did. Not once. I remember thinking that you deserved someone who lit up the same way when he looked at you. I'm not saying this to hurt you more, but maybe this is the universe protecting you from settling for less than you deserve." That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, she was going to use this weekend to start figuring out who she was without Michael. She had spent 3 years molding herself around his life, his career, his dreams. Now she had the opportunity to rediscover her own. She called her parents and Jessica to the hotel lounge and made an announcement. "I know this sounds crazy, but I want to stay in the city for a few more days. I need some time to think about what comes next, and I can't do that if I go home and dive back into the same routine." Her mother looked worried. "Sweetheart, are you sure? You've been through such a trauma." "That's exactly why I need to stay," Sarah replied. "I need to prove to myself that I can handle this, that I'm stronger than I think I am." Her father, ever practical, asked about work. Sarah taught high school English in a small town 2 hours away. The school year didn't start for another 2 weeks, so she had time. "I'll use my savings," she said. "I need to invest in myself right now." James Carter happened to be in the lounge when she made this announcement. She noticed him glance over with what looked like approval, though he quickly returned to his newspaper. There was something about his presence that she found oddly comforting. Maybe it was his calm confidence, or the way he seemed to observe the world with thoughtful intelligence. That evening, Sarah's family and friends gathered in the hotel restaurant for what should have been a celebration dinner. Instead, it became something unexpected and beautiful. Amanda raised her glass and proposed a toast. "To Sarah, the strongest woman I know. To new beginnings, second chances, and the courage to choose happiness over settling. And to Michael," she paused dramatically, "may he someday realize what an idiot he is." Everyone laughed, including Sarah. It was the first genuine laughter she had felt since reading that terrible text message. Looking around the table at the faces of people who truly loved her, Sarah realized that she wasn't alone. She had been so focused on the relationship she was losing that she had forgotten about all the relationships she still had. Her grandmother, who had insisted on flying in despite her age, reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You know what I did when your grandfather left me for 6 months during the Depression? I learned to fix cars. By the time he came back, I was running my own garage. Never needed to depend on any man again." "Grandpa left you?" Sarah asked, shocked. She had always heard their love story as a fairy tale. "Honey, every love story worth telling has some chapters that ain't so pretty. The difference is what you do with the ugly chapters. You can let them define you, or you can use them to write a better ending." As the evening wore on, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. The humiliation was still there, the heartbreak was still real, but underneath it all was a growing sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she didn't know what came next, and that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She excused herself from dinner and walked out to the hotel's garden terrace. The city sparkled below, full of lights and life and endless possibilities. Tomorrow, she would start figuring out who Sarah Mitchell was supposed to be. Tonight, she was simply grateful to be alive and to have discovered her own strength in the darkest moment of her life. Behind her, through the glass doors of the restaurant, she could hear her family and friends laughing and telling stories. She could see James Carter at a corner table, dining alone but occasionally glancing toward their group with what looked like admiration. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel seen, not pitted. Sarah woke up the next morning in her hotel room to the sound of rain pattering against the windows. For a brief, blissful moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then, reality crashed back, and she felt the familiar ache in her chest. Today was supposed to be her wedding day. She reached for her phone and saw 17 missed calls from Michael. Her heart jumped before she realized they were all from the night before, around 2 a.m. There were also 6 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. Sarah, please answer your phone. I made a terrible mistake. We need to talk. I was scared, but I love you. Please don't hate me. I'm coming to the hotel. Sarah stared at the messages with a mixture of anger and disbelief. After 24 hours of silence, after forcing her to cancel everything and face the humiliation alone, now he wanted to talk? She set the phone down without responding and got dressed. In the hotel lobby, she found James Carter having coffee and reading the morning paper. When he saw her, he folded the paper and stood up. Good morning, Sarah. How are you holding up? There was something about the way he said her name that made her pause. Most people had been treating her like a fragile piece of glass since yesterday, but James spoke to her like she was a person, not a victim. I'm angry, she said honestly, and confused, and maybe a little relieved, which makes me feel guilty. James gestured to the empty chair across from him. Would you like some coffee? Sometimes talking to a stranger can be easier than talking to family. Sarah surprised herself by sitting down. There was something calming about James's presence. He seemed like someone who had weathered his own storms and come out stronger. He called last night, she said, accepting the coffee he poured from the silver pot on his table. 17 times. After ignoring me completely for over a day, suddenly, he wants to talk. What did his messages say? That he made a mistake. That he was scared but loves me. Sarah shook her head. I don't understand how someone can love you and abandon you at the same time. James was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. I've learned that fear makes people do terrible things to the people they claim to love. The question is whether someone who would act on their fear in such a hurtful way is someone you want to build a life with. Everyone keeps telling me I'm better off without him. But we were together for 3 years. We had plans, dreams, a whole future mapped out. How do I just throw that away? You're not throwing it away, James said gently. It was already thrown away when he sent that text message. You're just acknowledging what already happened. Sarah found herself really looking at James for the first time. He appeared to be in his late 30s, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He wore his expensive clothes casually, like someone who was comfortable with success, but not defined by it. Can I ask you something? She said. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me. James smiled, and Sarah noticed that it transformed his entire face. My mother always said that how we treat people in their worst moments says everything about who we are. Besides, he paused, I know what it's like to have your life turned upside down by someone you trusted. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, her phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Without thinking, she answered. Sarah, thank God. Michael's voice was rushed, panicked. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk. I'm outside the hotel. You're here. Sarah looked toward the lobby entrance, her heart racing. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I can explain everything. Sarah looked at James, who was watching her with concern. I don't think that's a good idea, Michael. Sarah, please. I love you. I made a horrible mistake, but we can fix this. The church is still decorated. Most of the vendors can probably still do the wedding if we apologize and pay extra fees. We can still get married today if you'll just talk to me. The audacity of his words left Sarah speechless. He thought they could just flip a switch and pretend the last 24 hours hadn't happened? That she would marry him after he had humiliated her in front of everyone they knew? Michael, you can't be serious. I am serious. I love you, Sarah. I was just scared about making such a big commitment. But I realize now that losing you would be the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah stood up from the table, her coffee forgotten. You already made that mistake when you sent me a text message breaking up with me the day before our wedding. You made it when you turned off your phone and refused to talk to me. You made it when you left me to face our families and friends alone. I know I handled it badly, but no, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. There is no but the. You don't get to come back now that you've had time to think about what you're giving up. You don't get to put me through this emotional torture and then expect me to be grateful when you change your mind. She could hear Michael starting to cry on the other end of the phone. A few days ago, that would have broken her heart. Now it just made her angry. Sarah, please. I'm begging you. Come down and talk to me. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Sarah looked at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. You have my 5 minutes right now, Michael. Use them wisely. This isn't how I wanted to do this. I wanted to look you in the eyes and tell you how sorry I am. I wanted to hold you and promise that I'll never hurt you like this again. You can't promise that, Sarah said quietly. If you could do this once, you could do it again. And I deserve better than spending the rest of my life wondering when you're going to get scared and run. The line was quiet for a long moment. When Michael spoke again, his voice was small and defeated. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to fix this. You can't fix this, Michael. Some things can't be unfixed. I hope you learn from this and treat the next woman in your life better than you treated me. Sarah hung up the phone and immediately turned it off. Her hands were shaking, but she felt oddly proud of herself. She had stood her ground. She had spoken her truth. James was watching her with something that looked like admiration. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Sarah admitted, sitting back down. But it felt right. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I feel like I acted with dignity. You did more than that, James said. You acted with wisdom. It takes real strength to walk away from something familiar, even when it's not good for you. Sarah found herself really talking to James then, telling him about her relationship with Michael, about how she had gradually lost pieces of herself trying to fit into his vision of their life together. She told him about giving up her dream of teaching abroad to support Michael's career, about moving to a small town she didn't love because it was close to his job, about planning a wedding that reflected his tastes more than hers. It sounds like you've been compromising yourself for a long time, James observed. Maybe this is your chance to remember who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else needs you to be. I don't even know who that person is anymore, Sarah confessed. I've been half of a couple for so long that I've forgotten how to be a whole person on my own. Then, you have an adventure ahead of you, James said with a smile. Rediscovering yourself is one of life's greatest journeys. They talked for over an hour about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that James had built his hotel empire from scratch after his own divorce left him with nothing but determination and a fierce belief in treating people better than they expected to be treated. He had been married to his college sweetheart, who left him for his former best friend when his first business failed. It nearly destroyed me, James admitted. But it also forced me to become the person I was supposed to be instead of the person I thought I should be. Sometimes our biggest failures lead to our greatest successes. Sarah felt a connection to James that she hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. He listened to her without trying to fix her problems or tell her what she should feel. He simply witnessed her pain and reflected back her strength. I should let you get back to your work, Sarah said reluctantly, noticing that other guests were starting to fill the lobby. Actually, James said, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tonight. I know a small place that serves the best Italian food in the city, and I think you could use a good meal and some distraction. Sarah hesitated. Was it appropriate to have dinner with another man on what should have been her wedding day? Then, she realized that the old Sarah would have worried about what was appropriate. The new Sarah, the one who was learning to choose herself, could make her own decisions about what felt right. I'd like that, she said. But only if you promise it's not a pity dinner. James laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. I promise it's not a pity dinner. It's a celebration dinner. What are we celebrating? Your freedom, he said simply. That afternoon, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She went shopping for herself, not for Michael or their home or their future together, but simply because she saw things she liked. She bought a dress in a color Michael had always said wasn't flattering on her. She got her hair cut shorter than he preferred. She bought books she wanted to read and music she wanted to hear. With each purchase, each small act of choosing her own preferences over someone else's, Sarah felt a little more like herself. She realized that she had been living in a cage of other people's expectations for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply like what she liked. That evening, she met James at Lucia's, a small family-owned restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, nothing like the grand ballroom where her wedding reception should have been taking place. You look beautiful, James said when she arrived, and Sarah believed him. She felt beautiful for the first time in months. Over dinner, they talked about books and travel and dreams they had never shared with anyone else. Sarah learned that James spoke 3 languages, that he had once backpacked through South America alone, and that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep. James learned that Sarah wrote short stories in her spare time, that she dreamed of opening a bookshop cafe someday, and that she had never been to Paris despite teaching French literature. "Why haven't you gone?" James asked, genuinely curious. Michael always said it was too expensive and too touristy. He preferred practical vacations, places where we could also scout potential business opportunities. "And what do you prefer?" Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. "I want to see things that take my breath away. I want to stand in places where history happened. I want to eat food I can't pronounce and hear languages I don't understand." "Then, you should go," James said as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Maybe I will," Sarah replied. And, for the first time, she meant it. As the evening progressed, Sarah felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. There was no pressure with James, no sense that she needed to be anyone other than exactly who she was. He laughed at her jokes, listened to her stories, and shared his own with an openness that felt rare and precious. "Can I tell you something?" James said as they shared tiramisu for dessert. "Yesterday, when I first met you, I was impressed by your grace under pressure. But tonight, I'm even more impressed by your courage." Courage. It takes courage to choose the unknown over the familiar, even when the familiar is making you unhappy. Most people stay in situations that don't serve them because change is scarier than stagnation. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of feeling truly seen and understood. "I don't feel courageous," she said. "I feel terrified most of the time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," James replied. "It's feeling the fear and choosing to move forward anyway." When they walked back to the hotel, Sarah felt like she was floating. The evening had been perfect in a way her wedding day could never have been. It was real, honest, and entirely about two people getting to know each other without pretense or performance. At the hotel entrance, James paused. "Sarah, I want you to know that tonight wasn't about me trying to take advantage of your vulnerability. I genuinely enjoyed your company, and I hope we can stay in touch." "I enjoyed tonight too," Sarah said. More than I thought. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her small apartment, looking at the boxes that contained the remnants of her life with Michael. He had finally come to collect his things, looking haggard and remorseful. But Sarah felt nothing more than a distant sadness for the time they had wasted trying to force something that was never meant to be. "I still think we could have worked it out," Michael said as he loaded the last box into his car. "If you had just talked to me that day at the hotel instead of hanging up." Sarah shook her head, amazed at his continued inability to understand what he had done wrong. "Michael, the time for talking was before you sent that text message, not after. You made a choice, and so did I. We both have to live with the consequences." After he left, Sarah walked through her apartment, noticing how much lighter it felt without his presence. The books she loved were back on the shelves, no longer hidden because he thought they made the place look cluttered. The walls displayed artwork she had chosen, pieces that spoke to her soul rather than matching a predetermined color scheme. Even the air seemed to move more freely. Her phone rang, and she smiled when she saw James's name on the screen. They had been talking every day since that first dinner, sometimes for hours, sharing stories and dreams and thoughts about everything from literature to business to the small moments that make life meaningful. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice warm with concern. "Better than I expected," Sarah replied, curling up on her couch with a cup of tea. "He still doesn't understand what he did wrong, but that's not my problem to solve anymore." "And how are you feeling about it all?" Sarah considered the question seriously. James never asked casual questions. He genuinely wanted to know and would listen carefully to whatever she said. "Free," she said finally, "and excited about what comes next. I've been thinking about what you said about Paris. Oh, I looked into teaching abroad programs. There's one that starts in January, teaching English in France. The application deadline is next month." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That sounds amazing, Sarah. Are you going to apply?" "I think I am," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "For the first time in years, I'm making a decision based on what I want, not what someone else thinks I should want." "I'm proud of you," James said, and Sarah could hear the sincerity in his voice. That takes real courage. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into preparing her application for the teaching program. She updated her resume, wrote essays about her passion for education and cultural exchange, and gathered letters of recommendation from former colleagues. The process felt like she was building a bridge between her old life and whatever adventure waited ahead. James had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, even though Sarah sometimes wondered if he was encouraging her to leave just as they were getting to know each other. When she finally voiced this concern during one of their evening phone calls, he was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, I care about you too much to want you to stay for the wrong reasons," he said finally. "If you're meant to go to Paris, you should go. If we're meant to be in each other's lives, we'll find a way to make that work regardless of geography." His answer was so thoughtful and unselfish that it only made Sarah more certain that James was unlike anyone she had ever known. With Michael, every decision had been filtered through the question of how it would affect their relationship. With James, she felt encouraged to become the best version of herself, even if that meant taking risks or making choices that might complicate things between them. 2 weeks after submitting her application, Sarah received an email that made her heart race. She had been accepted into the program. She was going to Paris. She called James immediately, her voice breathless with excitement. "I got in. I'm going to Paris." "Sarah, that's incredible. Congratulations." His enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. "When do you leave?" "January 15th. I'll be teaching at a high school in Montmartre for 6 months, with the option to extend if things go well." As she said the words out loud, the reality of it hit her. She was actually doing this. She was completely changing her life. "We need to celebrate," James said. "Are you free for dinner tomorrow night? I know the perfect place." The next evening, James took her to Le Bernardin, one of the most elegant restaurants in the city. Sarah had never been anywhere so sophisticated, and she felt like she was living someone else's life as they were seated at a table overlooking the city lights. "This is too much," she protested as James ordered champagne. "Nothing is too much for celebrating someone brave enough to completely reinvent their life," he replied. "Besides, I have something I want to talk to you about." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The seriousness in his tone made her wonder if he was going to tell her that he thought they should stop seeing each other while she was in Paris. She braced herself for disappointment. "I've been thinking about what you said about opening a bookshop cafe someday," James began, swirling the champagne in his glass. "And I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" "I own a small building in Montmartre that used to house a bookshop. The previous tenant left last month, and I've been trying to decide what to do with the space. What would you think about turning it into the bookshop cafe you've always dreamed about?" Sarah stared at him in amazement. "Are you serious? You own property in Montmartre?" James smiled, looking almost embarrassed. "I have business interests all over Europe. The building has been in my portfolio for years, but I've never found the right person to run it. When you described your dream, I couldn't stop thinking about how perfect it would be." "James, I couldn't possibly afford something like that." "You wouldn't be buying it," he said quickly. "You'd be managing it. I would handle the renovations and startup costs as an investment. You would run the business and take a percentage of the profits. If it works out well, we could discuss you buying it outright someday." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer, but also suspicious. "Why would you do this for me? We've only known each other for a few weeks." James leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Because I believe in you, Sarah. I've watched you transform yourself from someone who was broken and defeated into someone who is brave enough to chase her dreams. I think you would be incredible at this, and I want to be part of helping you succeed. And what do you get out of it? The satisfaction of seeing someone I care about living their best life. And if I'm very lucky, maybe your friendship for many years to come." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. The offer was beyond generous, beyond anything she could have imagined. But more than that, it represented someone believing in her potential at a time when she was just beginning to believe in herself. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll think about it," James replied. "Take your time. Go to Paris, teach for a while, explore the city, get a feel for the neighborhood. If you decide you're interested, we can talk more about the details." That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. 6 months ago, she had been planning a wedding to a man who didn't value her dreams. Now she was being offered the chance to live in Paris and run her own business. The transformation was so dramatic it felt surreal. Over the next few weeks, As Sarah prepared for her move to Paris, she and James spent more time together. They visited museums, took long walks through the city, and had countless conversations about books, life, and everything in between. Sarah found herself falling for him in a way that felt entirely different from her relationship with Michael. With Michael, love had felt like work, like something she had to earn and maintain through constant effort. With James, love felt like coming home to herself. He saw her clearly, appreciated her uniqueness, and encouraged her growth without trying to control or change her. The night before her departure, James took her to dinner at a small bistro that reminded her of the Paris cafes she had seen in movies. As they shared a bottle of wine and talked about her upcoming adventure, Sarah realized that she was happier than she had ever been. "I'm scared," she admitted as they walked back to her apartment. "What if I'm terrible at teaching abroad? What if I can't handle being so far from everything familiar?" James stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, you survived having your heart broken, and your life turned upside down with more grace than most people show during ordinary difficulties. You have the strength to handle whatever challenges Paris throws at you." "And what about us?" she asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "What happens to whatever this is between us while I'm gone?" James reached out and took her hands in his. "That's up to you. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not seeing anyone else. If you want to stay in touch while you're in Paris, I would love that. If you need space to focus on your new life, I'll understand that too." "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "I want you to have the most amazing 6 months of your life," he said simply. "And then, I want you to come back and tell me all about it. After that, we'll see where life takes us." The next morning, James drove Sarah to the airport. As they stood at the security checkpoint, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and sadness that she couldn't quite untangle. "Thank you," she said, looking into his eyes. "For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing in me, for giving me the courage to chase my dreams. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to care about someone's happiness more than my own," he replied. James kissed her forehead gently, and Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "This isn't goodbye," he whispered. "This is just see you later." As Sarah's plane lifted off from the runway, she looked down at the city that had witnessed her transformation from abandoned bride to independent woman ready to take on the world. In her carry-on bag was a journal that James had given her, inscribed with a quote from Rainer Maria Rilke. "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us, long before it happens." 6 months earlier, Sarah had thought her future was mapped out, safe, and predictable. Now she was flying toward an adventure she never could have imagined, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected gift of starting over. The woman who had been abandoned at the altar was gone, replaced by someone brave enough to abandon the life she thought she wanted in favor of the life she was meant to live. As Paris grew closer below her, Sarah opened the journal and wrote her first entry. "Today I begin the life I never knew I wanted. Today I choose myself." 3 months into her Paris adventure, Sarah was running her morning route along the Seine when her phone rang. It was James, calling at his usual time, and she answered breathlessly. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Good morning yourself," she replied, slowing to a walk as she entered a small park. "Guess what? I found the perfect location for the bookshop. Tell me everything." "It's exactly what you described, on a cobblestone street just off the main square. The morning light streams through the front windows, and there's a small courtyard in the back that would be perfect for outdoor seating." "James, it's like something out of a dream. Have you thought about my offer?" he asked gently. Sarah paused by a fountain, watching the early morning joggers and dog walkers beginning their day. "I've thought about little else," she admitted. "I want to do it, James. I want to take the risk and build something beautiful. Then we'll make it happen," he said, and Sarah could hear the excitement in his voice. "I'll start the paperwork this week." "There's something else," Sarah said, her heart racing. "I miss you. More than I thought I would. More than I probably should after knowing you for such a short time." "I miss you too," James replied softly. "Every day. I have 3 months left in my teaching contract. But I've been thinking, what if I extended my stay to work on the bookshop? What if this became more than just a temporary adventure?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, Sarah held her breath. Sarah, are you sure? That's a big decision. I'm sure, she said, and she was. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based on what feels right in my heart, not what looks right on paper. This feels right. You feel right. In that case, James said, and she could hear the joy in his voice. I think I need to book a flight to Paris. Someone I care about very much is about to start a new business, and I wouldn't miss the grand opening for the world. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than air. I can't wait to show you my new life. I can't wait to see the woman you've become, James replied. Though I suspect she's been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. As Sarah walked back to her apartment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, if someone had told her that being abandoned at the altar would lead to the happiest period of her life, she would have thought they were crazy. Now she understood that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could happen to you. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she thought, and worthy of a love that celebrated rather than diminished her. The abandoned bride had become a woman who abandoned nothing but the limits she had placed on her own potential. In a few months, she would open the bookshop cafe of her dreams in the most romantic city in the world, supported by a man who saw her as she truly was and loved her not despite her independence, but because of it. The fairy tale she was living was better than any wedding could have been, because it was a story she had written herself. Possible 24 hours ago. Life has a funny way of surprising us when we're brave enough to let it. Sarah looked at James in the soft light from the hotel entrance and realized that she was attracted to him in a way that felt entirely different from what she had felt for Michael. With Michael, there had always been an undercurrent of anxiety, a sense that she needed to earn and maintain his love. With James, she felt accepted exactly as she was. Would it be completely inappropriate if I said I'd like to see you again? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. James smiled that warm, transformative smile. It would be completely appropriate. In fact, it would make me very happy. As Sarah rode the elevator up to her room, she realized that this day, which should have been the worst day of her life, had somehow become a day of unexpected gifts. She had discovered her own strength, her own voice, and her own worth. She had been reminded that she was capable of being happy, of connecting with someone who saw and appreciated who she really was. Tomorrow, she would start the process of building a new life. Tonight, she would fall asleep, not mourning what she had lost, but excited about what she might find. Sarah took a deep breath of the cool evening air and made a silent promise to herself. She would not waste this second chance. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same grace that everyone kept commenting on, even if she didn't feel graceful inside. The abandoned bride was about to discover that sometimes the most devastating endings are actually the most liberating beginnings.